Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, attackers take aim at Apple with a new exploit that could brick your MacBook. Plus, find out why you need to patch your iOS device from a 9-year-old vulnerability. Plus, find out about a Google bug that could potentially wipe a site completely from Google's index, and an excellent batch of your feedback. All that and more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome back to TechSNAP. TechSNAP is our show over on Jupiter Broadcasting that takes no inspiration from its name. In fact, we go in depth, in detail, into technology and the events surrounding the technology world. And my name is Chris, and joining me on the Skype line from Canada, that's not even in this country, is Alan. Hey there, Alan. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, Chris. It's good to be here again.
I know, episode 16, man. Look at, we just move right along.
How does it happen so fast?
I think it's the fact that we do, just heads down research all week long, that it just seems like we just were doing this. We never really stop.
Exactly.
The only break we really take from the show research is when we actually sit down and start the show.
Yep.
So it kind of feels like it always runs together. You know what, Alan, before we get rolling, I wanted to give a call out to the new HTML5 player we have over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. It's in trial runs right now. And if you're watching this over on YouTube or you downloaded it, if you wouldn't mind just going over to jupiterbroadcasting.com, look for TechSNAP 16 and give me some feedback on what you think about the new HTML5 player and what browser and operating system you tried it on. Experimenting with it to see how it works, hopefully to deliver video a little faster and a little more native without, the baggage of like a plugin and stuff like that. So let me know what you think. And leave just a comment on the show page there, and be sure to give some information about your system.
Yeah.
Now, Alan.
Especially if it didn't work.
Yeah.
Give us as much detail as you can so we can try to sort that out.
Totally. Last week, we put the call out for some viewer feedback, and then also you helped fill in for Brian on the Linux Action Show, and we put another call out on the Linux Action Show for feedback for this week's episode. So I mean, this is some of the most email we've gotten in a long time, and it's awesome. So we've got a ton of feedback.
Yep.
Yeah.
But keep it coming. The more the better.
Yeah, more is always better, and so you can send your feedback and questions to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com, because what we do here is we're going to dive into the tech news of this week, including some interesting stuff with the iPhone. But after all of that, I should say, we'll do your feedback, the stuff that you sent in. So send those in every week, TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com. We've got a bunch, and we want more. And then also we have a Reddit over at links.techsnap.tv, and you can submit stories directly into the show's queue, and then people can vote on them and leave comments, and we take all of that into when we're evaluating what we're going to cover in each week's episode. And again, that's links.techsnap.tv for the subreddit page. I think that's all the business we should cover. Alan, you want to jump into the news this week?
Sure.
All right, man. Well, our first story is, just like I was just saying a second ago, it's iPhone security related, and this one kind of is, I guess it's an issue that cropped up a little while ago, but it's related to... A long while ago. It's related to still even, like 2008 even, right?
The security vulnerability was found in 2002.
2002.
It's a It's a 9-year-old vulnerability in SSL.
It's a long established SSL. Yeah. This is unbelievable.
All the systems fixed it back in 2002, right? Like Microsoft and Linux and OpenSSL and all that.
Yeah.
But apparently the Apple implementation was for iOS was still vulnerable and nobody noticed.
How does that happen on a new operating system like that?
Well, because the vulnerability is so old, I guess nobody bothered to test the old vulnerability.
But you must be using some sort of old libraries or something in that to
Maybe.
Be vulnerable
and I
to
guess they never bothered.
So is there any interesting details on this story in particular?
Quite a bit. So it's a 9-year-old bug that was discovered in 2002 by Moxie Merlin Spike. And basically it allows an attacker to intercept your SSL session and decrypt it. The way it works is it exploits a flaw in the way that browsers and operating systems interpret the SSL certificate. So when you do a normal SSL connection, you connect, they send a certificate, and you verify that before you continue connecting.
Sure.
Because SSL is about more than providing just encryption. Providing encryption and also authenticity. You're making sure that
verification of identity.
Yes. Yeah, you're making sure that the website you're connecting to is actually your bank and not somebody pretending to be your bank.
Right.
So Apple's finally, after Moxie Merlin Spike released a new version of his very old now tool for doing this, so that now it's even easier for somebody to intercept.
Oh, you're kidding.
SSL stuff on any iOS device. So that's iPhone and iPad and iPod Touch and so on.
The good news is there's a patch out now that you can get.
Apple released a patch on Monday, so you want to make sure you patch all your iOS devices.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, if you're worried, it doesn't even break the latest round of like jailbreaking techniques that like the Red Snow guys do, I guess. It does break the jailbreakme.com. You can take your iDevice to, but the other like tethered jailbreaking methods, Apple didn't even fix in this little update they did. They must have just done like a sting update to the SSL stuff.
Right. Yeah, so any unpatched iOS device can basically have its SSL traffic intercepted by anybody. You don't even have to be an expert to do this with this simple tool. So basically, when you're at an open Wi-Fi spot, someone can set up this tool and it will send you a fake SSL certificate. So basically the way it works is normally with an SSL certificate, it has to be signed by an authority to be trusted by the browser, right? The way this exploit works is it ignores one of the parameters of a valid certificate called the basic constraint, and that's set on a regular like end-user certificate, like the one you would get for if you bought one for JupiterBroadcasting.com.
Yeah.
If you bought like an SSL certificate from GoDaddy for $15 or whatever.
Sure.
It comes with a constraint saying you can't use this to sign other certificates.
Right.
Because you're not actually trusted to do that.
Right.
Well, the Apple SSL library doesn't check for that. So I can take my $15 valid certificate and sign a certificate that says I'm PayPal.com, and the Apple browser will accept it.
I see. So this could also just be an implementation mistake as well, like a more.
So basically, that's all it was. It was an implementation mistake by Apple. And yeah, so there's nothing wrong with SSL. Nobody's like broken SSL because that would destroy the entire internet.
Right. That would be fundamentally very bad. Yes. Amazon and many companies would be very screwed. They depend on that SSL certificate.
Yes, and online banking and everything on the internet relies on that. Yeah, so basically Apple doesn't check that the certificate that signed the certificate it's accepting is actually allowed to sign certificates.
I see.
So I use my $15 certificate to sign one that says that I'm Google, and now I can intercept all anybody on the Wi-Fi spot tries to connect to Gmail. I pretend to be Gmail and say, see, I have the certificate that says I'm actually Gmail. And a Windows machine or Windows phone or whatever would see it and say, that's not a valid certificate because it's signed by somebody who's not allowed to sign stuff. But the Apple one doesn't check for that. And
this is obviously not an issue on the Mac side, so it's not like they just took the SSL implementation from the Mac and then re-implemented it on iOS. They must have done, their own independent ground-up implementation.
They probably tried to do a really light one or something.
Yeah, right. I could see that. Any other interesting things on this story?
Not that much. But yeah, there's a patch from Apple, and so you can fix your iOS device so that people can't intercept everything you do.
And if you are jailbroken, there's download links to the OS directly, because a lot of people, I think if you update through iTunes, will sometimes screw things up. So I put links for the direct downloads in the show notes. Every iOS device, everything, iPod Touch to the iPad to the iPhone has to be updated, right?
Yep. So this is a man-in-the-middle attack where they basically send a fake certificate, but Apple doesn't realize it's fake and accepts it. And so everything that's encrypted is actually encrypted with the key of the attacker, and so they can just decrypt it.
Right, and one of the questions that Blisk is asking in the chat room is, does this only apply to Safari? And really because everything just uses the WebKit, Safari, and all the back-end stuff that the rest of the operating system uses.
It's using the OS level library.
Right.
So it's every application on the phone.
Yep, or device, yeah, totally. So go patch, everyone, because this is one of those where the story that we have linked in the show notes links to the SSL snip where people could it even has setup instructions. Here's how to get it running. So, I mean, it's not like this is a challenge.
Yep.
This is like maybe Firesheep easy. Somebody could really build something like Firesheep for this. So.
Yeah. Well, in one of the news articles, the reporter's like, my mom could do this. That's how easy it is.
Yeah. So patch this one.
Yeah, you definitely want to keep up on that one.
Yeah. Should we move on?
SSL is something to screw with.
Should we move on to the next story?
Yep.
All right, this one's also Apple related. Boy, Apple had a bad week. Apple had its due because we really haven't talked about them at all on TechSNAP. This is the first time I think we've talked about Apple, right?
Yeah, well, I was trying to avoid all the hate, but
Yeah, I guess, you always stir some pot. Doesn't matter which side. You're
yes.
stirring somebody's pot. But, I mean, the stories are the stories. And this week...
Yeah, and well, some of these are... No, this one's just interesting. Like, the same thing could happen to
Right.
any notebook manufacturer.
Actually,
Just
I'd
happened
say
to have happened
I'd
at
say this
Apple.
next story points out a fundamental issue with programmable firmwares in general.
Yes, and it's not just batteries and not just Apple laptops.
But this for a proof of study here, Apple laptops vulnerable to a hack that kills or corrupts batteries by essentially corrupting or sending bogus instructions to the firmware controller for power management on MacBooks, right?
Right. So if you remember back in 2009, MacBooks had a lot of problems with their batteries.
Yeah.
So Apple pushed a firmware update that updated the software on the controller in the battery to make it work better. Researchers deconstructed that update and from it managed to determine what the password is for the firmware.
Right,
and
of course.
It turns out that every battery they've manufactured since that update has had the same password. So it's just some, password.
So they deconstructed like the update package.
Yeah.
That's not that hard, probably.
Apple uses the same like text string password on every battery. Just seems like a bad plan.
Yeah, it seems lazy.
Yeah.
So once they're able to get this code, they have like essentially like a login to the firmware chip?
Yeah, so basically they're able to control the firmware on the battery. So that means the attacker could remotely brick your MacBook by basically telling the firmware to do something like report the battery's always dead or just to cause the battery to break. They could also cause the battery to overheat by making it charge more than it's like telling the charger that it's not fully charged yet, so it would keep overcharging. And they could possibly even make it explode.
By disabling like the safeties, so the safeties are software based.
Well, we've heard of batteries on laptops accidentally exploding before, so somebody can purposely control it. They have a greater chance of being able to cause that to happen.
But I think, again, we should probably point out that this is not really limited to Apple. I mean, HP or Dell could be potentially vulnerable to the same thing if they're not following safe practices with their firmware controllers. And the other thing that is kind of concerning about this, Alan, is we know that devices like Motorola Android devices have these programmable firmware controllers in them where they can actually do things like brick the phone completely. So it's not just limited to laptops. It's all portable devices that have power management these days.
Exactly. And I'd be a little even more concerned about a cell phone because that's something I keep, on me.
Yeah, which could hurt you.
Yeah, especially, well,
I've had a laptop.
Well, yeah, but like even my cell phone, sometimes if I'm in like a basement or something that doesn't have good reception, my phone gets really hot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Searching. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And, well, if somebody was controlling it on purpose, I'm sure they could get it to be even hotter.
Mm-hmm. Like a Star Trek phaser on overload.
Yeah, it just burn me or melt or spew acid at me or who knows.
I would kind of be curious, do you have any kind of musings on how somebody could exploit a vulnerability like this now? Because there's nothing in the wild that we know of, but it doesn't seem like that would be outside of the realm of possibility to exploit something like this remotely or something like that.
If they can use any exploit to be able to run the code on your computer and then be able to control the battery.
So if they can get you to execute something at an administrative level, like through an email attachment or something.
Yeah, or like a flash exploit or any zero-day exploit kind of thing.
Then they could just load in the programming from that executable to the firmware.
Yeah. And also, there's some talk about being able to do the reverse, where they could overwrite the firmware on the battery, and they could make it report false data to the OS. Right? Make the OS think the battery's dead when it's not, or that it's charged when it's not, or, something like that. Just make it constantly switch the state around a whole bunch of times so that your OS drives you crazy, telling you, your battery's going to die. Oh, it's charged. It's going to die. Oh, it's charged. And, changing the brightness on your screen and stuff, right?
Oh, yeah, my Linux box does that now, so I'm already used to that. That's what I swear, every time I put Fedora on one of my laptops, that sounds exactly like what it does.
But also, they've talked about the possibility that they could put malware on the battery controller so that it would infect your computer.
Oh, man.
But then if you remove the malware, it could reinfect your computer.
You could wipe your OS.
Yeah, so you can wipe your OS completely. Next time you reboot, the malware on the battery infects your OS again.
Why can the firmware write back to the operating system?
They said that would require an exploit. So the firmware that runs on the battery would have to be able to have an exploit that would punch it into the OS.
So you got to get a little more sophisticated, but...
Right. But basically, it's all about how this is all possible and we should do something about it.
And all of this stuff in the past, I would have been like, oh, come on, they have to do this, and then they have to do this. But then we see stuff like Stuxnet come along, and it's like, oh, well, they did all of that plus, 20 times more. I mean, it's totally possible. We see it. And as long as there's a motivated and informed person behind it, I mean, you never know.
Yeah. And wouldn't it be fun to brick people, to sit in a Starbucks with a bunch of, those type of people with MacBooks and just brick their
those
MacBooks?
Type of people. I see.
You know, the really pretentious people with their MacBooks that just sit there.
Well, and think about what an issue would be if something similar like this was found on a Windows manufacturer, because then if you could exploit a Windows box, which is going to be a lot more prevalent and there's probably a lot easier to get into, then we could have a real problem. I mean, it's almost a good thing that this kind of thing gets discovered on a Mac, where the potential damage base is so much smaller than if it was found on a similar Windows manufacturer.
But it's entirely possible that the exact same problem exists on every laptop.
Exactly. And it could just be a matter of time before we find out that every Dell XPS laptop has this issue, and then boom, something gets out on a website, and now it's exploiting those. Yep. So it could be bad.
So the guy that found this is releasing the rest of his research at the Black Hat Security Conference in August. In the meantime, he's been talking with Apple and telling them about the vulnerability. And he's also created a utility, which he'll release during Black Hat, that will allow you to overwrite the password with a random string, so that somebody wouldn't be able to do this to your laptop.
Oh, but then you might be prevented from receiving updates from Apple to Flash.
Right, because then Apple wouldn't have the password, because in this case, maybe even you wouldn't have it. Of course, maybe it would be possible to flash it back to the original password, so that at some point.
It's an interesting concept where the users, to secure themselves properly, have to start considering the software on their firmware too. That's a pain in the ass. That's what that is. That's
exactly.
That's not really a world I want to live in. I kind of prefer the old on and off method, I think, where a controller was a controller and it was hardwired to be a controller. Yep. You ready for the next story, or any other notes on this one?
But just with that point there, that if it wasn't software controllable firmware, then Apple would have had to replace those MacBooks that didn't work properly.
It's true.
That had the problem with the battery. Or those people would have just been stuck with poor performing batteries.
Well, and from a customer experience standpoint, I can say, there's been situations in the past. We have a 28-inch, I think, right, or 27-inch Core i7 iMac that we do a lot of our editing on here in the studio. And when that thing first shipped, there was a bug with the video software that would cause... I don't know if it was software or what, but it would cause lines on the screen to show up that seem like issues with the actual lighting, the backlighting of the LED paneling. And I thought, oh, God, they got a bad LED backlight control system in here or something like that. And Apple was actually able to issue a software update which corrected the lighting issue. So with these programmable firmwares, there's a tremendous amount of things that they can fix after the product ships, which is pretty stunning. Yep. I mean, you'd think if you have a backlighting issue on your monitor, that's a manufacturing error. But it was just a firmware bug. So there are, I guess that could be a negative or a positive. I'm not sure. It's nice to know that if there's a charging problem with your laptop, maybe a year down the road, some software could fix it, possibly. But at the same time, this is the cost. This is what the downside of that capability is.
Yeah, and especially because what they put on the firmware is fairly limited. So it's not like they could do something where check that the update is signed by Apple and is valid and so on. Right.
Okay, let's talk about the next story, because I'm sure this got a few people in trouble. Maybe a few relationship statuses changed on Facebook over the week. There's a glitch that hit Facebook, and it's kind of funny because it revealed the thumbnails and descriptions of, those quote-unquote private videos that you put up on Facebook. And, of course, you couldn't actually see the video itself, but you could see all the details about it, and that kind of kills the whole idea of privacy.
Someone could, anyone that had... I think it was anybody who's on your friends list but who you didn't share the video with. I'm not sure the exact details. It's in the article. But yeah, people could view the list of your videos and see all the private ones, including the description you entered, what the video was of, and see the thumbnail. Now, they weren't able to see the video if you hadn't shared it with them, but they were able to see everything else.
Dun, dun, dun. What this actually is it kind of does show how... thin that line is on those security settings. Like, it's just a database entry away from being private or not. It's not like it's stored separately. It's not like it's isolated.
It's an if statement in their control, right?
Yeah,
And so it's very easy to slip up.
It could even be in the code of the website. Is this flagged this way or is it? Yeah, I mean, so it's just that thin hair line there. You've got to remember that when you're using these things. All of these social networks.
Yeah, and well, it's actually very similar to the authentication bug we saw with Dropbox, where they made a little mistake and anybody could log into any account with no password. Because, all that stood between them deciding you were logged in or not was that, a single flag.
Right. Right.
And they set that accidentally or whatever, or one of the checks doesn't happen properly, and all of a sudden somebody has access.
Now, I don't have any other thoughts on this story. Do you have anything else to say on that one? Because this next one,
not really.
I have some questions for you about, because I am a user, or at least I was a user, of Google Webmaster tools. And I guess, is Google pulled the Webmaster tools down?
Yeah, they're back up now.
Okay, so they pulled the plug temporarily because of a vulnerability in the Webmaster tools. Yep. What happened here?
So basically, with the Google Webmaster tools, you can go in and change a bunch of settings about your website and the way Google deals with your website.
Yeah.
Including setting a preference of whether you want the www in front of your domain or not and things like that. And you can get a bunch of details about how they're indexing your site. One of the options, though, is to remove your site from the index if you decide you don't want Google to have your site in the search results anymore. There was a slight problem with it, though, where it was a regular HTTP GET link, and basically if you change the URL parameters, you could make it remove somebody else's site from the Google index.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So basically the link would, it passed two parameters. One being your site, which you would keep to your site, because that's what they decided whether you were authorized or not. And the second was the URL you were trying to remove. So if you said, I want to, here's my site that I'm authenticated for, but I want you to remove, TechCrunch, it would delete TechCrunch from the Google index.
Well, that might not be such a bad thing.
Yeah.
Bump. That's pretty nasty, man. Because competitors would jump all over something like that.
Exactly. And, people could lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
Like with my friend's computer store, I would say about half of all of his sales come from Google search results.
That's interesting you say that, because a couple of years ago we went down to a company down here called Puget Systems who sells Linux systems, and we want to talk to him for the Linux Action Show. And one of the things he disclosed to me is he said the thing that turned our business around was figuring out how to get better ranking on Google, and now so many of our sales come from Google. He said it changed his business around.
For sure.
So yeah, if somebody could go in there and pull them out.
If somebody could just go in there and delete you out of the index, that could be huge damage.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you got back in the index, you might lose the standing you had before, and you'd lose all the sales until you got back in the index, and it could be devastating to a business.
Oh man! Wow. Well, should we?
So Google was very quick to fix it. They had from the time it was discovered.
Okay.
To the time it was fixed and Google Webmaster Tools was back up was less than 7 hours.
Okay. So we don't have to tell people.
Because it was likely, an extra if statement is all they had to do to make it happen. But
it was an if statement away from taking your site off the index.
Yeah. And Google says they've restored all the sites that were improperly removed.
Oh, that's good. Oh, good. So they will roll that back. All right, good. So no damage done. Lesson learned, right? Google, who controls the internet.
Basically, what happened there is they were checking that you were authorized, but they were checking the first parameter, and then so the first parameter would be like yoursite.com, and the second one could be like yoursite.com / some subdirectory that I want to remove, not my whole site, but just one subdirectory.
Sure.
That I forgot to exclude in robots.txt or whatever.
And that's where your porn is hidden. So
yeah, so I could say mysite.com, but delete yoursite.com, and that was where the problem was.
Well, there you go. But fixed, so that's good. So that's two of the stories we've talked about the vendors have already fixed, and they're both Apple and Google. You think the next vendor we're about to talk about is going to have a fix out that fast?
I don't know.
You ready to jump onto that one?
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about this. So a researcher has found a bug, what he considers a dangerous bug in Skype. There you go, Microsoft. Happy new Skype purchase. You got yourself your first bug in Skype. And I guess he's actually already notified them too, right?
Yep.
So that's good. But what's going on here? What are the details?
So basically, they did improper input validation and or output sanitation, and it would allow attackers to inject arbitrary HTML and JavaScript code into their own Skype profile, such that it would display on everybody who has them on their friends list. Specifically, the mobile phone number section. If you type some HTML in there, it will everybody who has you on your friends list, it'll show up under your name as your mobile phone number, right? But it'll be that code instead. So people could inject random JavaScript as their cell phone number, and everybody who has them or searches them or views their profile will run that JavaScript because Skype isn't escaping it properly. And because of that, they could add an iframe or do regular JavaScript and could do cross-site request forgery or cross-site scripting, and they could hijack your session, so they could do Skype commands as you,
or make your computer run Bitcoin mining.
Yep. Well, but they could steal your Skype account, change your Skype password, right? And some people have money in their Skype accounts, like I do. Right? If somebody managed to steal my Skype account, they would have a whole bunch of credit in there.
That's true. And
if I lost my Skype account, that would kind of suck. I have all my business contacts in there.
Well, we're kind of doing this show right now over Skype too, so that
that too.
Skype has admitted it, but they're calling it minor. They're saying, it's not a big deal. Not a big deal.
Yeah,
we'll get to it. We're busy. We're busy cashing in our millions.
Only our friends or only your friends can exploit you, so it's not that big a deal. But
yeah, you trust your friends, right?
That's a bad attitude. Even if that's how they feel, you always say, "We're working on it, and we'll have to fix that soon." You don't say, "Oh, it's not a big deal." Not big. That's just wrong attitude entirely.
I completely agree with you, man. And whenever you have a system that has a piece of software that has a listening component to it, and it has a peer-to-peer component to it, and it has a lot of access to your system, you have to treat that with some respect.
Well, every time you deal with any input from the user, you have to sanitize it.
Yeah.
Right?
Especially once we have something that's built like Skype, where there's so much intercommunication between the client
and especially where they're obviously rendering anything the user inputs as HTML, right?
Oh yeah, they aren't. I guess they must do that for formatting purposes, huh?
Right, and sure, that makes it easy and makes it look the same across platforms, but they really need to make sure that users can't inject random HTML into that.
No, you know what they ought to do? Use Markdown. Really, that might work for something like this. If chat clients on the back end could render Markdown, that might solve it, because you can't execute anything with Markdown.
Well, you can do inline HTML in Markdown, though.
Oh, well, you don't have to.
Right, yeah, you could do a slightly modified version.
Yeah, exactly. Just don't render the HTML. Any other thoughts on this Skype story?
No, I think that's about it.
Dude, Alan, you know what that means? It's time to jump in to the viewer feedback. All right, Al, now before we get to the first viewer feedback letter, I want to bring up something that we don't mention too often on most of our shows, and that's because, honestly, it's not really usually an easy thing to talk about. But one thing I want to mention is if you have enjoyed the content that any of the Jupiter Broadcasting shows have provided, but, specifically TechSNAP, hopefully you've enjoyed TechSNAP if you've made it this far. I like the way you put it on last, Alan. It's like if we were to charge for some of the information and advice we give out in our hourly contracting rate, this show would be quite a value. And one thing we want to ask you to consider is to visit jupiterbroadcasting.com/donate and maybe contribute, if you can afford to do it. The one that helps us the most is the monthly subscriptions, because I will tell you the honest truth. If you don't hear us do an ad in an episode, any show on the network, it means I personally financed it out of my own pocket, which is not a very sustainable business model. So if you can help us while we try to look for sponsors and bring on things that will help revenue, that would be fantastic. And those monthly donations are extremely appreciated because they can help us budget. So if you've enjoyed some of these content and it's valuable to you, that's always one way to visit. Also, from time to time, we're going to try to include some affiliate links to some of the products we talk about and things like that. So you can always maybe help us out by purchasing something, and we get a percentage of the purchase. But more on that as we figure that out.
Yeah, because if you're going to buy it anyway, might as well make sure we get the credit over here.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Alan, we have got some great questions this week. So are you ready, sir, for the first question? Because I will read it. It came from Segorith. I don't know, it's kind of a difficult one. But he says, I downloaded Eclipse, and I didn't bother to verify the MD5 hash they publish on the download page. How big of a security risk is this? And, you see this, too, with ISO images all the time, things like that. Is this something people should be doing? Should they be comparing these things?
Well, especially with the ISO images, the hash is published along with the download, and usually it's just a measure to allow you to ensure the file was downloaded properly, right? That it wasn't corrupted during downloading. Especially with an ISO image where you're talking 700 megabytes or up to like 4 gigabytes for a DVD, right? You wouldn't want to, burn the DVD and then find out that the file was corrupted somehow during download.
Right, totally.
But checking the download against the hash ensures that the file wasn't damaged, but it's not strong enough to ensure that the file hasn't been tampered with.
That's kind of what I was wondering, because yeah, I mean, we've covered how hashes are just really at this point not really any level of protection. Right.
Well, it's a fingerprint of the file, but if the file was modified, right, if somebody hacked into the Eclipse web server and included a backdoor in the copy of Eclipse, they could just calculate the MD5 of the compromised version and put that up on the page.
Yeah.
Right? So when the MD5 is just published on the page, it's only really helping you verify the file downloaded properly, not that it's the right file.
Which is good, so you know that it didn't get damaged.
But in order to be sure the file hasn't been tampered with, you need to get the hash out of band, right? Some other way and from a trusted source. So for example, with the FreeBSD ports tree, the package manager, when you download the package manager, it comes with the SHA-256 hash of every file that you might download. And then once you download it, it verifies against that trusted hash. And because it doesn't, an SHA-256, which is far more secure than an MD5, right? Because MD5 has been defeated a number of times.
And we know, like with those rainbow tables and whatnot, it's not a very complicated task. It's pretty trivial.
And with MD5, hackers have been able to craft 2 different files that end up with the same hash. Right? There's a pretty epic example with some PostScript files of like orders from like Caesar to like his generals, and one says one thing and one says the other thing, and both have MD5 hashes.
Oh, well, there you go. So it must be legit.
Are the same. Yeah. So basically, by inserting some random data in a comment block in the middle of the PostScript file, they're able to craft 2 files that have identical hashes.
So you're saying yes and no, basically, to his question?
Kind of.
Yeah.
And SSA1 is basically no longer considered secure enough for cryptographic purposes like this.
Right.
So that's why SSA256 is used most times now. Although SSA512 is actually faster. It takes less time to calculate on 64-bit hardware. It's some oddity of the algorithm that it's actually on 32-bit hardware, 512 takes longer. But because of the block size or whatever, on 64-bit hardware, 512 calculates faster than a 256.
Well, that's a win-win.
Yeah, but not every operating system has support for 512 built in yet, so it's not been adopted fully yet.
Oh.
But we could probably expect it to be.
Yeah, I would think so, especially as more and more things go 64-bit. I mean...
Exactly. Because someone's already proposed a paper of a different algorithm for 256 that actually uses the 512 and then drops half the hash, just because that would mean you could make a 256 in the same time as a 512 instead of in more time.
And all this is always done on the CPU. None of these things utilize the GPU for any of this kind of calculation stuff, right?
Although you can do an SSH 256 on a GPU, and that's what Bitcoins are.
Yeah. I wonder if that'll become more common for just general security stuff. I mean, it's not like it's a big overhead now, though, right? For generally what we use it for.
The disadvantage would you'd have to get the data into the video card to be able to hash it. With Bitcoins, you're hashing a short string and a little randomness, not like a 1 gigabyte file.
Right. Absolutely.
But it may actually be useful to do it with video cards. We may see applications where hashing has to happen a lot be accelerated by video cards in the near future. So some of the other solutions is something like GPG, right, where you actually sign the file and you can verify that against a trusted public key. Right? That's the ultimate solution.
Right.
Because then if the hacker changes the file, they don't have the private key to be able to make a new signature. And then the signature doesn't match, and you know that's a problem.
I've seen the Bitcoin community, just speaking of Bitcoin, has really embraced this GPG system. Like if you go on Silk Road, for example, and I don't know from first-hand experience, just from what we've read, you can't even do a transaction unless you have a GPG public key and you establish,
and they use the same thing for the reputation system at the BTC over the counter.
Yep, for for human-to-human trading.
Right, because that's one way to prove I am, the person that has this trade history, right? These people have signed my key saying that they've trusted me at this level for doing transactions, and so you can trust me, right? It's that web of trust.
Yeah.
So yes, a lot of package managers like Yum use this GPG approach to sign the files and the updates.
Right.
And you've seen a lot of open source projects websites will offer a little .asc, which is an ASCII version of the GPG signature for download along with the file. And then you can get their public key from a key server or whatever and verify that the file has not been modified or that it was signed by someone from the project that had the private key. Right? Or for example, all security update notifications for FreeBSD are signed by the security officer's key. So you can be sure that the instructions in it aren't how to install a backdoor.
It came from the office of the FreeBSD security guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I like that because then you know it's legit.
Yeah, and an example of this going wrong is a lot of people don't check the GPG signatures. And so a lot of projects stop bothering with posting them, right? Because especially if you're doing releases quite often.
Yeah, they figure if nobody's checking it, why am I wasting my time?
Yeah, you can tell from your web logs that like 1% of the people that download the software bother to check the GPG hash. So we're not even do it anymore.
Right.
But what happened was one open source project, Unreal IRCD, which is actually the IRC server we use for GeekShed.
I remember this.
One of their mirrors their official mirror got hacked, and so all the other mirrors copied from it. And they basically, for 6 months or so, the official download copy of their source code had the backdoor in it. And because they had given up on doing the GPG key because nobody was checking, there was no way for people to know that it was compromised.
That is
awful. They
awful.
discovered it and fixed it, and since then they've gone back to doing the GPG key. Even though most people don't check it, the couple of people who do will actually notice this time that something is hinky.
I remember when this happened, and I think we covered on the Linux Action Show because it was like, holy crap, how common is this? Is this a problem we're going to start seeing? But really, I haven't heard a lot of it since this happened.
No.
So hopefully open source projects.
It could easily happen to a lot of projects that don't do the GPG signing.
Totally.
And especially since most people don't check it.
I don't.
Now, but if you're using a package manager like Yum or apt-get or FreeBSD ports, it's happening in the background for you. So you're usually okay.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, and like in my case, I know like that apt-get, you can, when you add a new apt repo, you have to import its GPG key and things like that. So I know apt on Debian-based systems does that too. So it sounds like the Linux repo package managers, and it sounds like the FreeBSD guys are at least checking it at that level.
Yeah.
So it's always safe. Are you ready for the next question?
Yep.
All right, sir, here it goes. This one came from Christopher. Good name, sir. And he says, I have a Windows 7 laptop and an Ubuntu desktop. What would be a cheap and easy way to share files between those two?
Yeah,
that's a good question.
You and I were talking about this last night, and we're like, well, the obvious solution is like Samba and stuff. I'm like, but really, that's a bit of setup.
Yeah.
And then you had the right idea of FileZilla.
I like the idea of using Secure Copy because I believe Ubuntu ships with SSH server installed, and if it doesn't, it's just an app getaway. You know, Secure Copy is nice and straightforward and
I'm
secure.
sure it comes already installed. I think it's just whether it's enabled or not.
Probably, yeah.
And then you would just FileZilla is a SFTP/SCP client. It's cross-platform. They have it for Windows, Linux, and Mac.
Mm-hmm.
And so you download that on your machine, point it at the IP address of your Ubuntu machine, and give it your regular Ubuntu username and password. It'll log in over SSH and transfer files back and forth.
Yeah, I love FileZilla because it also works as a regular FTP client and a good one. Yeah. If you want,
it does FTP over SSL, SFTP, which is FTP over SSH,
right,
and SCP.
And SFTP would essentially be what he's using. It's
exactly.
SCP. But the other program I like a lot for Windows boxes, if you're going from the Windows box, is WinSCP. It's just a straight up SCP client, but it is pretty straightforward and nice. And if you can do like an Explorer interface, you can just browse it like an Explorer window or a Norton Commander if you're old school.
The only thing I didn't like about it, I don't know if it still applies to newer versions, but sometimes the interface freezes while it's doing stuff.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. Yeah.
And I found that really annoying.
FileZilla, however, can queue up and do the transfers in the background, which is nice.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And both of them also work automatically with if you have the PuTTY authentication agent with your keys saved.
Oh yeah.
It will use both. It'll do those automatically, and so it's quite handy that way too.
You can also use this method to transfer files with the Mac. If you go into a Mac system preferences and sharing and turn on SSH, you can now, from your Windows box, get to Macs as well without having to turn on Samba, which is nice.
And you can also get FileZilla for the Mac.
Now, he could, though, like, so he said he was on an Ubuntu machine, and he could, I believe, if you go into, like, your Nautilus file manager and you right-click on a folder and go to sharing, it will, in the background, once you give it your password, it will start the installation of Samba server and start it up and share that folder for you. And then you could go from your Windows box and browse the network and find it, theoretically.
Yep, and actually, I think, like you said, mentioned, Nautilus would be able to browse to the Windows machine even if you don't have Samba installed.
Right, because it should have the Samba client. Yeah.
Samba client is part of Nautilus. Right, so yeah, you should be able to do most of it out of the box.
Does he on a Windows 7 box, though, need to like do something in file sharing to make it start advertising itself on the network before?
Yeah, if you want to get to the Windows machine from the Ubuntu machine, you will have to, on the Windows machine, probably share a file.
Because then it starts up like, oh, you want to do file services. Well, what networks would you like to enable file services on? And you answer those questions, and then it starts broadcasting its Windows stuff to your network, and then the Ubuntu box picks it up.
Yeah, so it really depends what you want to do, whether doing something like the SFTP is easier. So it's definitely easier, but then if you're trying to do it all the time or have programs access the files, then maybe something like Samba is easier because then you can mount the file system as a drive.
And then again, you need to be cautious of what you store in there, but Dropbox could always be a solution if you just want to move files between the two machines really dead simple. Just keep in mind.
That's never as fast as doing it on your LAN, obviously.
Right. Because you're going to have to wait for the sync, and you're only going to get 2 gigs for free. And they've had security issues, so I don't know how much, you know, but it is an option, and it's one of like the dead simple ones. So, yeah. Should we move on to Chad's question?
Sure.
All right, Chad wrote in, and this is another good one. Oh boy, are you ready for this one, Alan?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He says, I have a network of CentOS servers and a central NFS and NIS servers, so central file server and network information store for like logins. However, we're considering adding a free NAS box to provide ZFS type storage. I need to be able to provide consistent centralized permissions and controls on this new file system. I don't want to have to manually recreate the users on the free NAS box. Should I switch to using LDAP to store all our user account information? Well, this is a good heavy-hitting IT question here.
Yeah. The first thing was FreeNAS is based on FreeBSD, which actually has a native NIS client.
Right.
So you can just have it subscribe to NIS. On FreeBSD, the service is actually called Yellow Pages. So,
yeah, that's right. I've set Yellow Pages up before.
Yeah, so YP bind, and basically, if you just set up, the domain that you set it up in, and it can connect to your Linux machine and will share the existing username and passwords and groups.
Do you think there could be any formatting issues between the two operating systems, the way they'd be stored on Linux?
A little bit, specifically with the password hashing.
Yeah.
But the default on both is MD5, so it'll work.
Okay.
If not, in your login.conf, you can change the password format in FreeBSD to, it'll have to match whatever you're using on the Linux machine.
Yeah. So he's going to need to get SSH. He's going to need to go into the free NAS control area and turn on the SSH login so we can get to the command line and do this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, because I don't think NIS is something that FreeNAS exposes, but it is part of the kernel, so it'll be there.
Mm-hmm.
You also might need to modify nsswitch.conf, which is basically the system that decides whether it should look at NIS first to see if the username exists, or if it should check the local files like etc password first, and then if the user doesn't exist, fail over to checking NIS.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that's definitely, I've always, and the first time I set up an LDAP-based login, I made the mistake of having it check LDAP first. When I lost network connectivity.
If you lose network connectivity and the LDAP server goes away, it's like a 2-minute timeout on everything.
Yeah, it's so bad.
You don't realize how often the file system is looking at like etc password, like
to check just for
running
writes
top,
or
PS, or doing a directory listing.
Mm-hmm.
All those things do it. And if you don't specifically remember to do -n to make it not resolve usernames, it's like hang for 2 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, so that would be our recommendation. I totally agree. Is if you don't need to go to LDAP, skip it because that's a pretty big transition. And if you have an existing NIS infrastructure in place, like Alan said, FreeBSD is going to snap right into that. So go with that.
And there's 2 options. you can either do the NS switch thing and set it to like files and then NIS. So then it'll check your password file. If it's not there, then it checks NIS.
Okay.
The other option is what's called compatible mode. And what that is, you make a special entry in your password file, in your group file, saying basically any group ID over this, check NIS. So it allows you to basically have some local users that are maybe overridden from your NIS, right? If you want your root password to be different or whatever, you can have it. So basically it allows you to do a hybrid. You can get more information about that by reading the man page on NS Switch.
Well, that could be cool.
But yeah. And the other option again is LDAP. But if you're going to do that, I would recommend rather than trying to set up an LDAP that mirrors your NIS for FreeBSD, would be if you're going to switch to LDAP, switch everything to LDAP, right? Switch your CentOS machines too. Don't try to maintain two separate networks. So the FreeBSD one will work with NIS, but if you want LDAP for some of the other features, or just because it's that much more robust, then I would switch your CentOS machines as well.
I think you're secretly trying to convert me from a Linux guy to a BSD guy. That's what I think. You slowly, all these little things that get dropped in the conversation that are like, oh, okay, all right, that sounds cool. I like that. That'd be kind of nice. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that one?
The other advantage with LDAP is, it gives you a couple other features, but and again, you do the same thing, the NS switch file again, but this time you tell it to, look at LDAP and if it's not in the local password file. Because this is actually kind of related to a question that I think I'll cover next week, when someone was asking, is there a way to build something kind of like Active Directory for Linux? And
yes.
I've done that once with Samba, LDAP, and Windows XP.
I have too.
Yeah.
So we should cover that at some point.
Mine was integrated with a website, which made it really complicated.
I have an interesting story where we really had to hack around. We wanted one central login with Active Directory as the authentication, but we wanted to host the intranet on an Apache PHP box. And, to get the two back, and this is the early 2000s, to get the two to talk back then was a real interesting undertaking. Maybe we should share the story.
Because now Samba is actually able to make your Linux box join the Active Directory domain.
Yeah.
As a standalone server.
Yeah. I came up with a lot of creative solutions back in the day to work around closed systems, and it's just so much easier these days.
But yeah, the other thing I was going to mention is if you're worried about performance, especially with ZFS, and like we talked about, you never realize how often it's looking up those user IDs.
Yeah.
You can set up the BSD machine as an NIS slave, so it maintains a local copy of your NIS database and would update it constantly from your master.
That's not a bad idea.
So YP serve, you set that up and you point it at your Linux master, and the BSD machine will act as a slave. So if your master is ever down, the BSD one will advertise on the network and machines will find it. But also the BSD machine will have a local copy of those so that if your main central NIS server goes down, the BSD machine doesn't, hang trying to look up those IDs,
right.
But also just that much more performance, right? It doesn't have that network delay every time it's trying to look up one of those IDs.
That's a great idea.
And, if you're trying to build a giant ZFS system, I'm guessing you want a bit of performance out of it.
Yeah, and if it's going to have all the file writes on it, it sounds like that's specifically what he's looking for. It's a pretty good idea, and plus it's good for redundancy. Yeah,
and I threw in a link to the FreeBSD handbook article on setting up NIS, which walks through step by step.
I effing love the FreeBSD handbook.
It is ridiculous how good it is.
Yeah, it really is. And what's so great about it is, if you find a good how-to online, it might apply to CentOS or it might apply to Debian. It might apply to, how you do it on SUSE. But this is just how you do it on FreeBSD.
Yep.
And that's just the way you do it because it's FreeBSD.
There are a few pages that are slightly out of date, though.
Those, I will flip this table right now, Alan. Don't even
specifically,
tell me about
the one about the sound system could use a little work. But
that was the one I was going to read. I'm out.
It works. It's just, it talks a lot about having to recompile the kernel, and you don't have to do that anymore.
Oh, so it just tells you to rebuild your kernel, but you don't got it? I gotcha. That's cool. I like doing that stuff anyway.
All the sound things are modular now.
Yeah, okay. Should we, anything else you want to cover in that Q&A, or should we jump into the Bitcoin Blaster?
Sure.
All right, Alan. Let's do the Bitcoin Blaster. What's funny is if you watch on YouTube, although you should be watching this in HTML5 to give us feedback, if you watch on YouTube, people will comment like when the Bitcoin Blaster segment starts. So we got a few Bitcoin hardcores out there, so that warms my heart. So this first one in here, I guess, is actually a shout out to you. It's a little milestone.
Yes, our little Bitcoin box mined its 36th Bitcoin today.
Not bad. That's not. Yeah. I wish Bitcoin was going up a little faster than it is, but that's not bad.
Yeah, the difficulty rate's going up again soon.
Now let's get that price up.
The 2 weeks, the last time it went up very, very small because of the denial of service attacks happened to extend it out so that the rate was about fine. But
just happened to be the right.
I've noticed that even on DeepBit, their global hash rate is up like 15 or more % over the last week and a half or so.
Oh boy,
they're up to 5,500 gigahashes a second or something like that.
So let's talk about, speaking of the Bitcoin, let's talk about the anonymity of Bitcoin, because that's one of the interesting elements to Bitcoin. And somebody has published a really well-written write-up. In fact, at first I passed this over because I thought, well, we already knew Bitcoin wasn't truly anonymous. But then when I read through the analysis that these people did, this is an incredible story they did.
Yep.
And it actually is less anonymous than I thought it was.
Right.
What are your thoughts? Does this concern you?
A little bit, not so much in that I don't need my Bitcoins to be all that anonymous.
Right, exactly.
But also, you can, if you read the article, you can see some of where the weak points are, and you can try to work to evade them a little bit.
And there's like Bitcoin tumblers and stuff that are trying to make things like this, where they kind of tumble the numbers around, and you get anonymized in that mix.
But yeah, a lot of it has to do with just network analysis and looking for patterns.
Yeah.
And it's like, just tracing transactions back and trying to figure out where they came from.
Let's just call it like it is, though. I mean, let's not make any bones about it. If you do a currency transaction of traditional currency, that is monitored and recorded from every end of it, from a marketing perspective to a government level perspective to a financial institute. I mean, there is absolutely not a single detail about that transaction that's private.
Right. And even with cash, like we've seen some projects where people are putting the serial numbers from money in online and like, oh, I saw this bill here. And right, you can kind of track back where a bill has been. Bitcoin's basically the same idea, except for it lists everywhere it's been. Not geographically, but just different accounts it's gone through.
Yeah, because it keeps that appended to it.
Yeah.
Another Bitcoin story that's pretty neat, because it's great to see as these things pop up online to see Bitcoin is right there, not being left behind. If you want to pick yourself up the Humble Indie Bundle, the 3rd edition just came out for like, I don't know, 18 more hours, I think, or something like that. This deal at least lasts 18 more hours, where you can actually buy the Humble Indie Bundle with Bitcoins. Isn't that neat? Yep. So that's one thing. Yeah. If you've got a few Bitcoins that you've earned over the time and you want to pick yourself up the Humble Indie Bundle, which has got some good free games. Well, not free games, but non-DRM games, which is a good way to spend your Bitcoin money, right?
It is.
All right.
It's always nice to see something. Gotta love indie games, but also seeing, something you can spend your Bitcoins on.
Now, this next story I put in here because I'm concerned.
Kind of important.
Yeah, at the beginning of the week, Bitcoin was starting to see a bit of a rebound. It was starting to come up to like 14.5 for US. It was staying more stable on the Canadian side, but now it slid back down, and I have to kind of wonder if it's not because of the news out of Trade Hill, which is sort of came up as like the big competitor to Mt. Gox, the other, like the main Bitcoin exchange. And the bad news is that Trade Hill has had to stop accepting Dwolla deposits because Dwolla has reversed their policy of reversing transactions. And, of course...
Well, not officially, though. That's the problem.
Right.
So basically, Dwolla's policy on their website says that transactions cannot be reversed. However, Trade Hill has noticed that a bunch of times transactions have gone from being confirmed to being pending or just downright disappeared, and their balance has gone down. So Dwolla has basically raked back transactions and then tried to make them disappear rather than, showing a transaction saying this transaction was reversed.
And being that Dwolla right now is sort of the main way to get US dollars into one of these exchanges to buy Bitcoins, I got to believe this sort of slowed the rebound of the Bitcoin a bit.
For sure. If people can't get money and they can't buy Bitcoins.
Right. I mean, Mt. Gox is still open for business, but how long is that going to last?
Also, I think that Dwolla is one of the primary ways to get your money out again.
Oh.
Because a wire transfer is quite expensive, especially with smaller dollar amounts.
Totally, yeah. I didn't even think about. I've been sitting on my Bitcoins and just I don't really plan to cash them out. I mainly have the Bitcoins I have now for like future Bitcoin expenses. I just imagine if there's going to be a world where I'll probably eventually need to spend Bitcoin, I just want to have them. I hadn't even thought about it, that I wouldn't be able to get them out. And the other thing is Trade Hill. It was kind of stepped up on the security game. Like Trade Hill has introduced free for beta testing, two-factor authentication. They've done more. They have sort of a stabler Bitcoin price. It doesn't fluctuate as much, which is nice. So you don't feel like you're going to get screwed the second you do the transaction. I mean, I like Trade Hill, so I hope they can work this out because
it could be really bad for them because they said that it's like $37,000 disappeared.
Yeah,
and that they caught and stopped another $27,000 from being disappeared. Basically, people were signing up for accounts, doing the Dwolla deposit, buying the Bitcoins, making them disappear, right? Send them off out of their Trade Hill account, and then disappearing, and then the Dwolla would rake back the money.
It's too bad.
Yeah, and so Trade Hill was out maybe a large sum of money.
It sounds like almost 40K.
Yeah, and like they're saying, we are Dwolla's second biggest customer, and we've done over $1 million in transactions, and their support people just keep screwing us around, saying they'll call us back, and they don't.
I've been watching Dwolla, and I'll tell you, I think they're trying to distance themselves from Bitcoin. They're trying to claim that they just recently had a massive...
at the same time raking in all the money from Bitcoin.
That's how they're making their money. They're trying to claim it's this new mobile payments API system that they just launched. I mean, I don't even know of any real apps in circulation that use this new API. They're trying to claim that's where all their millions in transactions are coming from, but it's not. It's Bitcoin. I mean, if you just watch the transaction logs, you see order after order after order, and that's all going through Dwolla.
Yep.
So this is either going to get rectified fast, or it's them trying to prevent themselves from just...
Yep, it's already been a couple of days, and Trade Hill has recordings of their phone calls and verified copies of the CSV download transaction histories showing things at this date. The transaction was cleared, and at this date it went back to pending, and at this date it just completely disappeared from our transaction log. And phone calls where Dwolla's promising that the manager will call you back or whatever, and then they never get a call.
Those mothers. Well, should we move on to the roundup? Are you ready for that?
Yep.
All right, we're curving out this show here, Alan. Now, I'll cover the first roundup story. And I saw this one hit our Reddit, so I'm glad it made it in the roundup. This is a do-it-yourself Dropbox alternatives article that sort of rounds up some of your best options. And we've talked about this a lot. It's been a question we've gotten but almost...
a ton of times.
Yeah, a ton of times. So we thought we'd throw this link in the roundup. You can go read this article on some very feasible Dropbox alternatives. So, what do you think? You have any comments on that one?
Not really.
Yeah, I'm still kind of on the fence myself with that. All right, so the next roundup story, you want to take this one?
Yep.
The stolen
attackers managed to steal 8 gigabytes of data from the Italian cybercrime unit.
Oh, man. Taking it from the beast itself, you're going to get bit.
So who's going to investigate this one? It seems like it would kind of be a conflict of interest for them to investigate themselves.
Well, I mean, come on. They've got to be pissed, right?
I'm sure, yes.
That's like rubbing it in their face. So there you go. And they say, did anybody know what was in there that they took?
I think it was in the article, but
yeah,
didn't have time.
That's what we put in the roundup, right? All right, so the next story in the roundup is this is a good one for me because this is a problem that I have. I always need more storage, and it looks like this. I love this. Petabytes on a budget. So this guy has done this awesome build project, and he calls it Petabyte on a budget, but it's a 4U server with 135 terabytes of storage, and it clocks in. Remember, 135 terabytes of storage, and it clocks in at $7,384.
Yeah, and I think about at least more than half of that is just the hard drives, obviously.
Sure.
Yeah, so this is a company, Backblaze. This is actually the version 2.0. Their original version, I think, was 46 terabytes in a server.
Yeah.
And they have racks and racks and racks of these things.
Yeah.
Each one of those is like, well, it has 136 terabytes, but by the time they're rated, it's probably a little bit less of usable space. But for simple math, say that's 100 terabytes each. 48U rack, 4 U's a piece. Even if you take out some for routers and UPSs or whatever, you figure you're getting 10 of those in each rack. So that's a petabyte in each rack, right?
They've done an awesome write-up that compares like the savings of cost over the
over like the commercial solutions.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I had you on the wrong shot there, Alan. I had you on the full screen shot, but I didn't even know I had that shot. But yeah, check this out. It shows you over 3 years. Backblaze is if you include the power and the cost of the hardware over 3 years, Backblaze will be a grand total cost of $94,000. But like, say if you went with Amazon S3 storage for that same storage, it'd be $2.4 million.
Yes, S3 is actually quite expensive.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts.
Of course, it works if you need less space. The Amazon one can be cheaper, right?
And if you just need temporary space too, because you don't have the hardware investment. Yeah, so it's not. Exactly. Yeah, but it just depends on your need. But okay. You want to take this anonymous one here in the?
Sure.
All right.
So Anonymous claims that they've managed to steal about 1 gigabyte of data from NATO, and they plan to release it.
That'll be fun to watch. I'm sure we'll cover that on TechSNAP.
Again, simple SQL injection.
So many times it is these stupid, simple things.
So it's likely data that was just in a database, so I'm hoping it's not that sensitive, but we'll have to see once it comes out.
Now, this next story in the roundup was an interesting one to see it develop. Google is now on and off warning users about active malware infections when they're using Google products.
Yep.
Some people thought that this was an invasion kind of looking too far into the machine. But if they're just using simple signals to detect this stuff, I think this is sort of a community service.
Yeah, the first one was people who get their Google hijacked, right?
I see that all the time.
So so when Google detects that, it puts a giant message saying, hey, you might want to fix your shit.
Yeah, exactly, right? So that, I guess this is something they still have in testing, but I could totally see that coming out more and more frequently.
I think it's a good idea. And users should, if Google can tell, then you have a problem and you should fix it.
Yep. All right, Alan, let's talk about the DoD. You want to cover that one?
The U.S. Department of Defense lost 24,000 files via a compromised contractor.
Yeah.
We talked about this a little bit last week.
Just last week.
The weak link is a lot of times is these contractors, not the government itself. And a lot of the times it comes down to why were these files in the hands of the contractor in the first place? Right? It seems like they hand over too much information at once.
I agree with you. I agree. It seems like there should be some sort of multi-level. You only get only exclusively the access that you need.
Yeah, it's called like need to know.
Yeah. Yeah, something like that. All right, the last story here in the roundup is Australian ISP's wireless routers set up a secret wireless network. Wow.
Yeah. So it basically doesn't broadcast the SSID, but it's a simple WPA with a password, and it's just there, and people don't know it, and so they don't know to turn it off.
Yeah, so they hide the SSID.
Yeah, and it's running along beside their regular wireless network.
Why?
It's basically a manufacturer default that shouldn't be there.
Why would that be there at all?
I don't know.
That seems like you're doing that to provide just like, hey, in case an official needs to come by and get internet access, here, everybody knows about it. It's like a little secret. We've slipped into this, we slipped our secret internet into your router.
Yeah, I don't know all the details, but it's,
once that
if you have one of these routers, you probably want to fix it.
Yeah. Jeez, no kidding. So link in the show notes if you are in Australia and you want more about that. Alan, is that the show?
Yep.
Is that we used to do a whole show?
Yes.
How about that? TechSNAP 16 is in the bag. Now, if you want to watch us live, head over to jblive.tv because we shoot this live with our internet chat room friends over jblive.tv at 1 p.m. Pacific. And what's that? East Coast?
2000 UTC.
Boom. Alan's got the hookup for you guys on the East Coast. And, of course, you can always get a converter. We have linked over at jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar. Now, remember, we want to hear your thoughts on that HTML5 video playback. How do you like it? Yes. How did it work for you? And if it didn't work for you, give us the details about your system. And also, thanks to all of you who visit jupiterbroadcasting.com/donate and help out with the production costs for these shows. All right, everyone. Well, that wraps up this week's episode of TechSNAP, but we'll see you right back here next Friday.